It was one heck of a week for the Trump administration. We saw conflicts flare up on three totally different fronts, and we're going to dive into what really connects them all. Think about it: an independent bank, a foreign power, and a major American city. At first glance, they seem completely unrelated, right? But in just 1 week, each one became a flashpoint for the administration. So, what on earth is the common thread here? That's what we're going to do. We're going to break down each of these confrontations piece by piece to see if there's a pattern, a kind of signature style for how the administration handles a crisis. Okay, first up, a battle over the economy itself. I'm talking about the very public and honestly, increasingly personal fight between President Trump and the U.S. Federal Reserve. So just a quick refresher for everyone. The Federal Reserve, the Fed, is our country's central bank. Its whole reason for being is to manage the economy based on cold, hard data, not politics. That independence, it's absolutely crucial to how it's supposed to work. Just look at this timeline. President Trump himself picked Jerome Powell for the job back in 2017. But things went south pretty fast when Powell wouldn't just lower interest rates whenever the president wanted. And now, Powell is literally the subject of a criminal investigation by the president's own DOJ. That is a wild escalation. So, as you can imagine, this has created two totally different narratives. From Powell's perspective, the investigation is just straight-up political intimidation because he refused to bend to pressure. The president, on the other hand, denies he has anything to do with it at all. And in a pretty rare public statement, Powell was completely defiant. He didn't just defend what he did, he basically framed this as a core test of his public duty. He's signaling loud and clear that he is not backing down. And get this, the alarm bells aren't just coming from the usual critics. We're seeing prominent Republicans like Senators Tillis and Murkowski calling this out as an attack on the Fed's independence. Even the Treasury Secretary reportedly warned that this whole thing could seriously spook the financial markets. So this isn't just politics as usual. It's creating major waves inside the president's own party. Okay, let's pivot to our second story now. We're shifting from a fight with the domestic institution to a high-stakes standoff on the world stage, with tensions absolutely boiling over in Iran. The backdrop here is this huge wave of anti-government protests that are just sweeping across Iran, and the human cost has been truly staggering. Human rights groups are reporting that over 500 people have been killed and more than 10,000 arrested. And you can see the administration's response has been ramping up step by step. It started with economic pressure, sure, but this week it really leaped forward, first with a threat of a massive 25% tariff on anybody trading with Iran, and then with a direct statement from the president himself that he's looking at some very strong options, which, strongly implies military force. But here's where it gets confusing. At the exact same time, the messages coming out of Washington are all over the place. You have the president publicly talking about military action, while his own ambassador to Israel is saying there are no plans to intervene at this stage. It leaves everyone, friends and foes alike, scratching their heads about what the actual policy is. And this really highlights what an incredibly delicate situation this is. I mean, the administration is trying to walk this tightrope. On one hand, it wants to look like a champion for the Iranian people's democratic hopes, but on the other, it could easily be painted by the regime in Tehran as a foreign enemy, just trying to take advantage of the chaos. And for our final story, we're bringing it all back home. We're looking at a 10th showdown between the federal government and an American city, Minneapolis. So what kicked this all off was a truly tragic event: the fatal shooting of a 37-year-old woman named Renee Good by an agent from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. And right away, two completely opposite stories emerged. The White House press secretary called the agent's actions absolutely justified self-defense against a lunatic. But the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, was just in disbelief. He pointed to video evidence and said, quote, "He walked out of there with a hop in his step. Give me a break." Now, an independent analysis for NBC News by some veteran law enforcement officers gives us a more nuanced picture. They were clear that Renee Good wasn't blameless in the encounter, but their consensus was that the ICE agent's tactics made the situation worse than it had to be, and ultimately that the shooting was probably avoidable. Well, in response to the protests that erupted after the shooting, the federal government made a huge move. They sent in over 1,000 additional federal agents to the Twin Cities area, and that's on top of the 2,000 who were already there. This massive federal presence led to a pretty extraordinary response from the state itself. Minnesota is now actually suing the administration, and they're using incredibly strong language, calling the whole thing a federal invasion. So we've looked at the Fed, Iran, and Minneapolis. You have to step back and ask yourself, what does this all add up to? Is there a pattern here? Well, when you lay it all out like this, a pretty clear playbook starts to emerge. In every single one of these cases, you see a direct assertion of presidential power over established institutions and norms. You see a preference for going it alone, for using federal force, and for using really confrontational language to define the conflict. It's a pattern of disruption over dialogue. And that leaves us with one crucial, lingering question. When a government finds itself in conflict with its own institutions, its adversaries abroad, and even its own cities, all at the same time, if that's not just a chaotic week, but a consistent